My parents gifted the house I bought to my younger sister, leaving it to be auctioned off by the bank after I stopped paying the mortgage. At 28, I'm struggling to process the discovery that my parents transferred ownership of the house I purchased for them to my 25-year-old sister, Perry, without a word of warning. I've always been aware of my parents' preferential treatment towards Perry, but this blatant act of betrayal is beyond anything I could have imagined. Their love for her is a potent, toxic cocktail, a stark contrast to the emptiness I feel from them. As the elder sibling, I've always shouldered the burden of their lofty expectations. Responsibility was ingrained in me from a tender age, while Perry reveled in a princess-like existence, albeit one limited by their financial constraints. Her desires were consistently met, and she enjoyed the freedom to pursue her passions, while I toiled under the weight of academic demands. My parents never masked their ambitions for me, a secure, prosperous career, with absolute prohibition on academic failure. Upon graduating high school, they exhausted their savings and took out loans to fund my technical schooling. I proposed assuming the loan myself, repaying it after securing employment, but they rejected the idea, citing exorbitant interest rates and my supposed financial naivete. Unbeknownst to me, their apparent protection from debt was merely a prelude to future exploitation. After university, I landed a lucrative tech job, fulfilling their aspirations perfectly. Though undoubtedly proud, they treated me like a commodity, an investment ripe for harvesting. Their constant pronouncements about their sacrifices and admonitions to never forget where I came from, initially interpreted as benign reminders of humility, eventually revealed their manipulative nature. Emotional blackmail was their weapon of choice. The pressure intensified once I started working. Every visit home became an ordeal of thinly veiled guilt trips from my father, reminding me of their financial strain and the implicit expectation of repayment. Aware of their long-held dream of owning a home, and knowing their savings had been diverted to my education, I felt a growing sense of obligation. Just a year into my career, during a seemingly ordinary family dinner, my dad fixed me with an intense stare and declared that it was my turn to buy them a house, emphasizing their exhaustion with renting. His words landed like a lead weight in my stomach. I was sharing a cramped apartment with roommates, barely able to afford my own rent, yet they expected me to shoulder the immense financial burden of a house purchase. My protests about my financial instability were brushed aside, reframed as long-term planning. My mother, her voice dripping with false sweetness, echoed his sentiment, reminding me of their role in my educational success and portraying the house as a form of repayment. I couldn't deny their contributions, leaving me feeling trapped and resentful. While grateful for their support, their constant pronouncements felt increasingly like emotional suffocation. Their pronouncements were often overwhelming, tempting me to scream, "Who asked you to do this for me?" But I lacked the courage to confront them, maintaining a careful distance, responding only to urgent calls. Visiting them became unthinkable after that dinner conversation, using work as a convenient excuse. Yet, the obligation to buy them a house remained, a persistent hum in the background of my life. After 5 years of diligent saving and relentless work, I succumbed. I purchased a modest, comfortable house for them in a quiet neighborhood, nothing extravagant, but a decent home. I rationalized it as the least I could do, given their past sacrifices. For 3 years, I dutifully paid the mortgage, even making extra payments to expedite its completion. I had other aspirations, my own house, travel, a family. I couldn't be tethered to this financial burden indefinitely. Post-purchase, their pressure subsided. They proudly showcased the house, boasting to friends and family about their investment paying off. While not overtly bothered, this didn't bridge the emotional chasm between us. I maintained my distance, visits remaining infrequent. 2 days ago, after months of work-related absence, I decided to surprise my parents with a visit. However, a surprise of a different kind awaited me. Perry's car was parked outside. Assuming she was visiting, I felt a flicker of anticipation for a family reunion. Perry had married and moved out while my parents were still renting. It had been years since her wedding, the last time I'd seen her. Perry answered the door in her pajamas. I assumed it was a brief visit. We exchanged hugs, and then she asked, "What are you doing here?" I retorted playfully, "I could ask you the same question." Entering the house, I inquired about my parents' whereabouts. Casually, as if it were the most mundane fact, she announced they had moved. I froze. Moved? What do you mean, moved? This is their house. Perry shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. They didn't tell you? They gave it to me. I live here now. The floor seemed to disappear beneath me. They gave you the house? The house I've been paying for? Yes, she confirmed, with an air of indifference, as if it were perfectly logical. Mom and Dad said I needed it more. I'm planning on having a baby soon, and they thought I should have the house. Stunned, I asked where my parents were living now. They're renting an apartment across town, she replied, as if this were utterly normal. Speechless, my mind ablaze with fury, I left. I drove directly to their new apartment, unannounced. My mom opened the door, and I immediately unleashed my anger. What the hell is going on? Perry just told me you gave her the house I bought, the house I've been paying for. Explain yourselves. My mom had the audacity to smile, as if it were a trivial matter. Calm down, sweetheart. Come in. We didn't think it would bother you. I entered but remained standing, demanding answers. My voice escalated. You didn't think it would bother me? You gave away the house I bought without even telling me? How could you possibly think I wouldn't care? My mom sighed, as if I were the unreasonable one. Well, we thought since things are going so well for you, you wouldn't mind. Perry is planning on having a baby. Don't you want your future nieces and nephews to be born in a stable home, not some rented place that will create an unstable environment? Now they don't have to worry about rent and can focus on other things, like the baby's well-being. I snapped. I don't care where my nieces and nephews are born and raised. Living in a rented house isn't a tragedy. I still rent. Their stability is their problem, not mine. If they want a better life, they should find better jobs. My dad, drawn by the commotion, emerged from the bedroom. What's all the fuss about? He asked. She needs financial security. We had to give her the house. She didn't have the same opportunities you did. We didn't pay for her college, so she deserves it. I was dumbfounded. How could parents utter such words and face no repercussions? You didn't pay for her college because she didn't go to college. She dropped out of high school, remember? They remained oblivious to the gravity of their actions. You're successful, they insisted. You can buy another house. Sure I will, I retorted, but it will be for me, not for you. I was beyond reasoned discussion. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Their logic was incomprehensible. I stormed out of their apartment, a maelstrom of fury, checked into a hotel, and haven't left since. I'm at a loss. I can't continue paying the mortgage, knowing the truth, but navigating this situation feels overwhelming. My parents are incapable of handling the mortgage payments, and Perry certainly can't. This fiasco unfolded on Friday. Today is Sunday, and my return flight is Tuesday. Initially, I considered booking an immediate departure, but after calming down, I realized I had unfinished business. I needed to ascertain the remaining loan balance, believing my extra payments had created a surplus. I texted my dad, requesting he accompany me to the bank tomorrow to obtain the details. Update 1. There's more to this story, and I'm trembling as I write. We just returned from the bank, and my discovery is utterly devastating. The extra mortgage payments never reached the bank. My dad had been paying only the minimum due, pocketing the surplus for his own expenses, specifically their apartment rent. I had been living frugally, sacrificing to pay off the mortgage early, while he was siphoning off my hard-earned money. When the bank manager presented the monthly deposit records, I immediately sensed a discrepancy. I pointed out the error, showing him my transaction history, proving the significantly higher amounts I'd been sending my dad each month. My dad intervened, insisting the bank's records were accurate and suggesting we discuss it later. Initially, I assumed confusion on his part, but then he gripped my arm, reiterating the accuracy of the records and urging me to postpone the discussion. It was like another punch to the gut, leaving me dizzy with the premonition of further betrayal. I sat in stunned silence as the manager concluded the meeting, outlining the remaining balance and various loan consolidation options. The moment the manager left us alone, my dad pulled me aside. "Why are we talking about the extra money you sent for the mortgage?" he asked. Furious, I responded. Of course it was for the mortgage. What else would I send extra money for? I told you it was for the mortgage. His next words were the final blow. I thought you were sending it for our expenses. I used it to pay our rent. I stared at him, speechless, then buried my face in my hands, utterly defeated. What do I do with these people? What do I do now? My dad sat beside me, urging me not to make a scene, dismissing it as not a big deal. I exploded. Not a big deal? You manipulated me into buying you a house, then gave it to Perry without telling me, and you used the extra mortgage money to pay your rent. My dad, not one to tolerate confrontation, especially in public, retorted angrily, "Don't you dare raise your voice at me. You didn't do us a favor buying that house. I spent my life savings on your education. I don't have to explain myself. You sent the money. I paid the mortgage on time. What's the problem if I use the extra for rent? It's not like we asked for more." His words fueled my rage. The extra money was intended to accelerate mortgage repayment, not subsidize their new apartment. I stormed out of the bank, fuming. I heard him shouting my name, but I didn't look back, heading straight for the subway. My mom called repeatedly, texting pleas for me to return and discuss the matter calmly. I ignored her. I was done with discussions. My decision was made. No more of their toxic manipulation. Update 2. Apologies for any errors in the previous update. I was shaking with rage. Let me address some common questions from the comments. No, my family is not Asian. Parental pressure and manipulation aren't exclusive to one ethnicity. I'd prefer not to disclose my background. The mortgage was in my dad's name. This was a deliberate decision on my part, anticipating future loan applications for a car and house. I'm grateful for that foresight now, as it simplifies my current plan. The following day, I resumed my normal routine. A month passed, and I didn't send the usual mortgage payment. Predictably, my dad attempted contact on the 1st of the month, only to discover I had blocked him. Not just him, my mom, Perry, and her husband were blocked as well. I was severing ties, determined to eradicate their drama from my life. They wanted to give Perry the house? Fine. Let her handle the payments. Let her bear the responsibility. My parents, realizing my intent, panicked. I received calls and voicemails from unknown numbers, likely from their friends, berating me for halting payments and lamenting their inability to afford the mortgage. I felt a grim satisfaction. Their desperation now their problem. I blocked those numbers too. 3 days later, my dad appeared at my apartment door after work, furious. "You can't just abandon us. You owe us. We paid for your education, raised you. Who do you think you are? I've already repaid you," I countered. "I've paid far more on that mortgage than you spent on my tuition. I owe you nothing." He accused me of ingratitude. I cut him off. "No more guilt trips. I've done enough. I'm not paying for the house, the rent, or anything else. You made your decision. Now deal with the consequences. You treated me like a commodity, investing in me for college only to bleed me dry for the rest of my life." "I'm not an ATM," I retorted, leaving the hallway and driving away, avoiding my apartment to prevent further confrontation. He was gone when I returned later that night. My mom's desperate voicemails continued, originating from various new numbers. Even Perry left a lengthy message, claiming she needed the house for her future family, accusing me of selfishness for withholding help. Selfish? I'd been shouldering the entire burden while she contributed nothing. I remained resolute, refusing to succumb to their manipulation. I was done. Update 3. The house was auctioned off, forcing Perry to move out. As predicted, neither Perry nor my parents could afford the mortgage. My parents, already struggling with their rent, couldn't manage the combined expenses. My ceasing payments was a ticking time bomb. Almost a year later, I learned of the house's sale. My parents had scrambled to save it, depleting their savings and retirement funds, but to no avail. Tensions flared between Perry and my parents. They requested she contribute 50% towards the mortgage, but she refused, insisting the house was a gift and their responsibility. The gravity of their mistake finally dawned on them, but it was too late. In the end, allowing the foreclosure was the wisest course of action. My dad recouped a substantial sum from the sale, a portion of the down payment, and the accumulated mortgage payments. He more than recovered his investment in my education. While technically my money, I don't expect a cent back. I consider it a closed chapter. At least now they can no longer claim they did me a favor by funding my education. I repaid them, with interest. I feel no guilt about severing ties. Through relatives, I learned my parents downsized to a smaller apartment, saving the remaining sale proceeds for retirement, proclaiming their self-sufficiency in old age and their refusal to rely on me. They also withdrew all financial support from Perry, instructing her to take responsibility for her own family. She attempted further manipulation, citing their obligation to secure her future since they had done so for me, but they held firm, no longer swayed by her demands. I'm pleased they finally saw the light. Meanwhile, I've rented my own apartment, finally enjoying privacy, and I'm saving for my own house, a place that will be exclusively mine. Distancing myself from family is difficult, but sometimes those closest to you exploit you the most. It took time to recognize this, but I don't regret my decision. Family or not, I deserve better than being treated as a walking bank account. Update 4. I've noticed many questions remain, so let me clarify a few points before sharing recent developments. One common query concerns the cost of my education versus my mortgage expenditure. While I lack precise figures, my education totaled approximately $40,000. The mortgage, including extra payments intended for early payoff, but diverted to their rent, reached about $52,000. I've more than repaid them, extinguishing any perceived debt. Regarding Perry, she isn't homeless, as some have speculated. She and her husband reside with her in-laws. I'm not a heartless monster who rendered his sister destitute. The house was intended for my parents. Perry and her husband could have assumed the mortgage, but characteristically, they shirked responsibility. The house was in my parents' name. They gifted it to Perry. They were free to continue payments. I had no recourse, nor any desire to intervene. Now, the latest development. My dad reappeared, not to visit, but to demand further financial support. He expects me to buy them another house after their mishandling of the first. He invoked their sacrifices for their children, predictably citing the monumental cost of my education, a topic that pervades every conversation with them. He even mentioned gifting the house to Perry, seemingly oblivious to the irony, considering it was originally intended for them. According to him, they've fulfilled their parental duties and now deserve a house. I unequivocally refused. My savings are earmarked for my down payment, not their recurring financial woes. I reiterated that their opportunity for home ownership vanished when they gifted the house to Perry. They're welcome to ask her for assistance. I'd love to witness that exchange. My dad lingered in the city, urging further consideration, but a work trip prevented further interaction. Or rather, I prevented it by blocking his number. He couldn't reach me. He was gone when I returned from my trip, and I haven't heard from him since. I'm nearing my savings goal for a down payment. Hopefully my next update will announce my first home purchase. Update 5. I'm thrilled to announce I've bought a house. Furnishing and other tasks remain, but I finally have a roof over my head that I can truly call my own. Heeding your advice, I haven't publicized the purchase, not even on social media. Only a small circle of local friends, unconnected to my family, are aware. There's no chance of this news reaching my parents. I'm taking every precaution to avoid a repeat of scenarios I've read about online, like demands to give the house to my pregnant sister. I'm fiercely guarding this information, determined to avoid a mama bear situation where they invoke family to justify their entitlement. I jokingly envision an electric fence to deter parental intrusion, but seriously, I've learned from Reddit the importance of secrecy until firm boundaries are established. So, instead of advice on dealing with toxic parents, I'm seeking decorating tips. Interior design isn't my forte. During my roommate days, others handled decor, and my rented apartment came furnished. Now, faced with a blank canvas, I'm slightly intimidated. I don't want to create a personality-deficient space, or worse, commit decorating atrocities.